Professor Maximilian Mayer, you are teaching at Tongji University in China. You are an expert on Chinese politics and Chinese culture. You deal with the geostrategic, geocultural influences of China a lot. Therefore, I would like to ask you a few questions about China's influence in the world. Recently, we have had alarming news from a number of books published in the United States saying there is a coming conflict with China, not just a trade conflict, but possibly even a military conflict. How does that look from a more Chinese point of view?
Yeah, from a Chinese point of view, there's first of all a growing ambition to play a bigger role in the world, to become one of the rule makers, not only of the rule takers, to become more engaged, and that's done with considerable self-confidence and also with considerable more capabilities and resources economically, most of all. There's also growing military modernization and some advances in terms of maritime power, of course, building up aircraft carriers. So there are capabilities to do that. However, to conclude from that China wants to take over the rule of the world, that's far from the reality. What we see is that a strong sort of anti-China discourse, and in China sort of a mirror image of that, a stronger anti-US position is taken by influential experts and some policymakers, and that's more the worrying stuff. So it's on the discursive level of ideas and talk and metaphors used for the other side.
But we get the impression here in this country, it's not just the discourse among experts, it is also the policy of the Xi Jinping government, that there is a greater emphasis on nationalism, on control, on the Communist Party, on an expansionist drive, to put it that way, which worries a lot of people in this country. Is this totally unjustified, that worry?
No, of course not. I mean, the reality is always complexer than just one narrative. What's true is the internal development in China. We see a concentration of power. We see a stronger role for the party secretary, for example, vis-a-vis the military, but also, as we have been discussing today, vis-a-vis the economy. So the party wants to reinsert its control, its guiding function in all kinds of aspects, right? In civil society, in economy, in regulations, in the law, everywhere. With regard to foreign policy, I think there's a clear stance of, on the one hand, of becoming the most influential player in the region and redesigning regional order. Which to some degree has been achieved, for example, in the South China Sea by building up these islands. But for every regional leadership, you need followers. And if you don't have the ability to collect those followers, not just by force, but also by conviction, right, by soft power, then your regional leadership will be quite limited. And that's what China is experiencing now. China has dished out coercive measures against the Philippines, against South Korea, against other actors. So people are very aware that China is also can be a bully in the region. And so many regional countries are hedging against China. And there can be no talk about China achieving soon or quickly regional leadership.
So you would be very skeptical about the influence of Chinese soft power?
I think the Chinese soft power is limited by one factor. China is, for many countries in the world, an example for extremely successful economic growth and economic development. But the true source of soft power is not just economic growth, but value-based, value and principle-based. And on that level, China has not much to offer.
Have a quick look at the Taiwan issue. Is there something going to happen, or will that be a problem which will be pushed back over the years so that no decisive change to the current status quo will happen? What is your expectation?
At the moment, it looks like that the side of the Communist Party and the Chinese government is pushing very hard for having a decision or having a result earlier than later. So at the moment, it seems that from their point of view, the window of action is actually closing down. The mainland side thinks that in Taiwan there's some cultural and political and security dynamics which need to be addressed, which need to be responded to. For example, the current Taiwanese president is no longer. I mean, he's not making a clear statement whether she supports the '92 agreement. between the two sides, and that's very concerning for the Chinese side. At the same time, I think the Chinese government assumes that the resolve on the side of the United States to become engaged in such a conflict is maybe not there, and therefore there's a strategic option to do so.
Okay, thank you. And if you do the same and look at the South China Sea problem, also that is dormant at the moment. No, not you wouldn't talk about an absolute crisis right now. Is that going to change? Is that a situation which will continue in that dormant state?
That situation will very likely continue in that dormant state for the simple reason that the Chinese have changed the rule, the rule of the game completely by building up the hard power they have now through these islands. There's no other chance, no other option for the regional states like the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, as to play along. So they will play along, and therefore the Chinese side doesn't have to push anything. They're now pushing the narrative of we share resources together, for example, with the government of the Philippines. So in this conflict, I see there is rather a de-escalation because the Chinese side has achieved a power position from which it can be conciliatory.
Thank you. And North Korea? Will the North Korea problem be still a headache for Xi Jinping next year this time?
Yeah, most definitely. The North Korea problem is one of the, I mean, that's the only conflict in the world which is still directly coming from the Cold War, and it's still reflecting a Cold War power structure and Cold War order in East Asia, which is still there. So a change in that order is a great political bargain and will be inevitably involving maybe rebasement or involving completely different institutions for the region or a different system of alliance, especially with regards to the Korean Peninsula. So I don't expect an outcome this year or next year for that, but there's much more at stake than just the question of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. It's also a question, for example, of a militarily rising Japan, which becomes more involved. It's related to the Quad cooperation between India, Australia, Japan, and possibly other states. Even the European Union seems now to consider, at least internally, whether it could play some role in the Quad. And that's from the Chinese point of view, of course, a quite significant strategic shift. So in the case of North Korea, all of this is baked in one big complex, and therefore I don't expect from this summit, there is no one cut-through solution for that thing.
But you would expect North Korea to remain an uneasy ally of the Chinese. You wouldn't expect North Korea to move closer to the United States in any decisive way.
Well, the question is whether North Korea is still an ally of China, despite all the official rhetoric. That's out for judgment. I think North Korea has been moving away so long from China for many, many reasons that it's even thinkable that to some degree there might be sort of maybe not a rapprochement, but sort of a coming closer to the United States as a way to balance China and as a way to undermine Japanese influence as well on the Korean Peninsula. We see, for example, at the moment a contestation between Japan, who wants to have the abductee issue be put on the table, while the South Koreans and North Koreans saying, no, we're not going to talk about that. And on this topic, you can see that the Japanese influence is also an issue here, and therefore for all of the players, this headache will go on, and it's not going to be an easy solution.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you a final kind of unfair question. What is your prediction for the future of Chinese-American relations within the next year or two?
My prediction would be that we see more escalation, both on the trade side, because there are incentives for both sides to go on to keep their position, from my point of view. We see the danger of escalation with regard to North Korea, because if the summit happens and if there's no outcome of the summit,
the summit between Trump
and Kim,
yeah.
And if that summit doesn't have an outcome, then Trump needs to do something. And he will do something, that's pretty sure. The question is what, and the dangers there are much bigger. Escalation, the Taiwan issue is coming as well there. So I see for the next 2 years actually a lot of possibilities for more escalation rather than conciliation. That's why I think it's so important to keep up all kinds of channels we have to talk in all kinds of levels with the Chinese side. It's more important than ever, despite these conflicts, or maybe just because of them. First of all, and second, I think it's really important to tone down the language and to go away from statements which are vilifying or which are demonizing the other side. Look at the interests which are there and try to find interest-based solution, and that needs to be also expressed on a discursive level by using language which is somehow conducive for interest formulation instead of escalation of a rhetorical conflict, which might turn into real conflict.
Thank you very much for your insights, Professor Maximilian Mayer. Thank you very much for coming to UNC-Chapel Hill.